I was financially literate. From the time I was 18 to 31, I was financially literate. I was a financial fool. And I learned through my own experience, you can be as literate as you want, but if your relationship with money is such that you don't know where your money goes. That was my problem. I used to have to borrow money from my dad almost every other month, and my dad would say, wait, you work every day, I work every day, I have money to lend you, you have no money to lend me. And I'd say, well, Dad, I don't know where my money goes. And his response was, it doesn't leave home while you're sleeping. And I'd gotten into the credit card culture. My parents didn't have credit cards. My grandparents didn't have credit cards. But I discovered that the credit card was both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because if you were out of money, you could still spend. It was a curse because if you were out of money, you could still spend. And I developed a lifestyle of using credit cards as though they were income. So I was making $25,000 a year. I had a $5,000 credit card limit, so I lived as if I earned $30,000. And the way I got from running from bill collectors to sitting on the board of the Federal Home Loan Bank was to change my relationship with money. I actually argued with a bill collector once and told her that she shouldn't be yelling at me because I was late on my bills. She should thank me because if I paid my bills on time, she wouldn't have a job. So I decided when I was a pastor that the way I could best help my congregation was to not beat them up over the 10% that we wanted them to give to the church, but really help them with a strategy to increase their financial fortitude. We know now that financial stress is a threat to mental health. I talk about that in the book. We know that financial stress is the number one cause for marital stress that ends up in divorce. We know that financial stress lowers productivity in the workplace. And we know that financial stress is not limited to one income category. For a high percentage of people who earn $100,000 a year or more are still living paycheck to paycheck. And so I had to change my ways. When I was 31 years old, my grandmother died and left me a house. It was all paid for, and I couldn't figure out how someone with no civil rights, no college degree, no husband that could work because my granddad had a stroke after their sixth child. How could this woman with a sixth grade education own 3 pieces of real estate all paid for? And what I discovered was that she knew the difference between her wants and her needs. She lived below her means. She invested in assets that grew. She kept money in her bosom. She always had cash. And so my grandmother's lifestyle really developed for me a pattern that I have turned into a program, and we work with churches and sororities and nonprofits. Any Deltas in the house? All right. We are big partners with Delta Sigma Theta, Zeta Phi Beta, and other groups, along with HomeFree-USA. And so I appreciate the fact that people like HomeFree recruit, train, motivate, and deploy human resources that work much harder than their salaries would ever suggest. Those who work in the nonprofit community work just as hard, if not harder, than those in the corporate community. They have no stock options. They make no overtime. Many have no retirement plans. You can have succession if you want, but you've got to succeed to something. And so these meetings are critical because not only do they give us the tools that we need to impact other people's lives, but they give us the tools that we need for the lives of those who are really doing the work. I was at an HBCU last month, and I gave a speech. It was, I won't tell you which school it was, and I was trying to help the young people understand that before you increase your income, the key is to develop a strategy for the money that you have. You know, if increasing the minimum wage was a solution to our financial stress, then how do you explain the National Basketball Association, where the minimum wage is about $1 million a year and 60% of the players file bankruptcy within 3 years of retirement? So it's not really how much you earn, it's how much you keep and what you do with the money that you earn. And so I was telling a story about an experience my wife and I had at a restaurant where this young, very attractive, very friendly waitress was serving us our lunch, and she had the most beautiful fingernails I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, they looked like Michelangelo had painted these fingernails. They were a work of art. So I just asked her if she didn't mind telling me how much her fingernails cost. And she told me they cost $135. Now, this was not the owner of the restaurant. She was the waitress in the restaurant. So I asked her the question, how often do you get those fingernails done for $135? She said, every 3 weeks. So I said, well, ma'am, I don't want to get all in your business or hurt your feelings, but if you would just cut back, if you would take one of those fingernail visits, every 3 weeks, just split it in half, take that $135, put it in a mutual fund, you're 22 now, by the time you're my age, you have $1 million. And so shifting the money that we have, finding spending leaks, establishing spending priorities is really what our mission is, so that when people do increase their income, when people do own a small business, when people start rising up the economic ladder because they're homeowners, they have more equity, their spending, their values, their priorities, and their strategies align with their goals. And if we can do that, we can help people take advantage of existing resources, because the only thing worse than not having what you need is not using what you have. Millions of dollars, when I was on the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York, millions of dollars that were available for first-time home buyer support stayed on the table because people just didn't know, and the banks didn't come and ask for the money. And the nonprofits could not convince the banks to do what the banks had a right to do. And so it's meetings like these where we can come together, we can join forces, form coalitions, merge resources, and most importantly, inspire each other to do more than we've ever done before. We need each other more in this country than we've ever needed before. We need examples of people who are cooperating. We need passion around lifting people economically. We need each other now in ways that perhaps we have not needed each other in our lifetime. But thanks to HomeFree, we have each other. Here we are. And because we have each other, we don't have to need each other, but we can mobilize each other and motivate one another to make the greatest impact. It was said already that in times of stress, in times of economic stress, social stress, emotional stress, nonprofits rise to the occasion and make the critical difference. Here we are today with our for-profit partners, and I believe that, like we've been doing for the last few decades, we will rise to the occasion and we will help people who otherwise would not have been helped. I'm of the belief that if one person benefits from this meeting, if one family becomes a homeowner that otherwise would not have, if one HBCU student has dreams that they can achieve and accomplish as a result of this coalition and this coming together, it was worth all of the money, all of the time, all of the effort. So let's find that one and make it happen. God bless you.